With the closure of the Nintendo eShop looming on the horizon next year, I decided recently it was time to bite the bullet and pull the trigger on purchasing a 3DS to finally experience what it's like to play Sega's old 2D superscalar games in the third dimension, courtesy of the 3D Sega Ages line. I'd always planned to get one eventually to see what all this 3D malarkey was all about, but I'd hoped they might have come down in price a bit more by this point. Unfortunately, the closure of the eShop combined with the majority of the 3D Ages stuff not getting a physical release in the West forced my hand somewhat by putting a timer on the availability of these titles, and apparently the pandemic, remember that, has had an effect on prices not dropping, as demand for the console is apparently still there despite its age. Unfortunately, I pulled the trigger a little too soon and bought an old style 3DS XL without realising that the new 3DS XL has actually got a vastly superior 3D effect, so I actually ended up additionally buying a new 3DS not long after the first one. Anyway, the eShop closure turned out to be a bit of a moot point in the end, as I ended up jailbreaking both systems with custom firmware, so that I could still access all that Sega Ages 3D loveliness that never made it to the West. Now you might be thinking to yourself here, yeah, what's all this got to do with VR? Now honestly, there is context to this, so stick with me here. The point is, I finally tried these old Sega 2D games in 3D, and the effect has been great, especially on the new 3DS that tracks your eye movement to stop you losing focus. In fact, the 3D effect is so nice, I keep thinking to myself, why don't Sega take it a step further and make proper VR versions of these games? Something I very briefly alluded to before in the follow-on video to my which version of Outrun 2 is the best video. I'd never really given much thought to how something like this would be possible though. In my head, I just pictured it being like when you play something like Wipeout a Mega Collection in third-person view, using the Sony PSVR headset, where you see the ship in front of you, almost like it's an RC model that you're controlling that you could almost reach out and touch, with the ability to look all around you at the surrounding track. But obviously, this isn't going to work for a 2D sprite-based game. However, a week or so ago, I was perusing an internet forum on a thread related to the recent Switch remake of House of the Dead, and about the possibility of it getting a PC or PS4 release. Somebody on the thread said that if it did get ported, they hoped it would have an optional VR mode, where it's like you're standing right in the game. Then somebody else mentioned about a VR mode where instead of standing in the game itself, you have a mode where it looks like you're standing in front of an actual House of the Dead arcade cabinet with the original game's gun. What an absolute stroke of genius! I fucking love this idea. This would be the perfect way to do a Sega Superscalar game in VR. Imagine a virtual setup where it looks like you're sat in a Deluxe hydraulic Outrun or Afterburner cabinet, or perched on the Super Hang-On bike. The 3DS 3D Ages games already do something a bit like this, with the option to display your screen as if you're really playing on the different cabinets inside your 3DS screen. The 3DS home screen menu also has lovely looking 3D representations of the cabinets too, that look like you could actually reach into the screen and grab them. What about if Sega released a Sega Ages VR collection? As an interactive virtual arcade you could walk around and actually look at the machines as well as play on them. Similar to how you can walk around and inspect your X-Wing fighter in Star Wars Battlefront's VR mission before you get in the cockpit. This got me to thinking further. What about multiplayer? Imagine in the multiplayer, you've got an 8-player linked Daytona USA arrangement that you could play against 7 other people online. Only instead of being restricted to just being able to see your own screen, you can look to your left or your right to see what the other players are doing on the screens of their virtual cabinets, and whether it's time for you to start thinking about playing dirty and trying to smash them into the Sonic wall, just like in a real-life arcade setup. Obviously, 3D polygon titles like Daytona and House of the Dead don't need to constrain themselves to just 2 dimensions. So what if there was an option to, at the press of a button, go properly inside the game? Just as a little side note, for what it's worth, Until Dawn Rush of Blood is, in my opinion, the closest we've got to an actual PSVR version of House of the Dead, which is the PlayStation VR game that you can see running in the background here. It is absolutely pants-browningly terrifying, and playing it with dual-wielded PlayStation moves really does give that sort of old-school House of the Dead light gun feel to the game. If Sega do decide to do a Sega VR Ages line, maybe they could do it as a one-off compilation. Maybe they could do a starter pack. Your base arcade with a few classic games to get you started off. Maybe additional games could be sold as an expansion pack. Packs that quite literally expand the floor space of your virtual arcade to fit new machines in. Man, I'm excited just thinking about this idea. Whilst there are proper hardcore physical arcade cabinet collectors out there, and people who make their own cabinets, for a lot of us this just isn't a feasible option, unfortunately. Whether it's due to family commitments, just not having enough space where you live, or just lacking the skills to actually do a bit of woodwork and electronics in the first place. I'm very limited space-wise where I am, so I've made some compromises with regards to a physical collection. Even the likes of arcade 1-up collecting takes a fair amount of space and isn't exactly cheap, well, not in the UK at any rate. As well as the suboptimal selection of games here compared to the US and Canada. So how cool would it be to own your very own virtual arcade, packed to the rafters with those deluxe hydraulic beasts that you can remember from your childhood, that you wouldn't have a hope in hell of owning otherwise. I know I'd snap up a game pack like this in an instant. I'd be like, seriously Sega, just shut up and take my money. Anyway, so what do you guys think about this? Is this something you'd be interested in seeing? Do you think Sega would ever seriously consider doing it if it seemed like there was a genuine interest from their fan base? Seeing as how modern Sega seem to generally only be interested in rehashing the same old Sonic games time and time again, and by all accounts apparently could not give less of a fuck about their collection of old Model 2 and Sega Model 3 arcade titles. Some people like to bring up the fact that there are limitations with some of these games because of the fact that they're locked behind licenses, particularly in the case of some of the Model 3 stuff like Scud Race, Daytona USA 2, and also some of the later stuff like Outrun 2, which is specifically locked behind a lot of Ferrari branding. But come on, for fuck's sake, there's ways and means around this, it's really not that difficult. Anyway, let's steer away from that before I start getting into ranting territory. What Sega arcade titles would you most like to see in your own VR arcade? Let me know in the comments below. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed my idea for a Sega VR Ages pack. If you did, please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. I've been Mr. Thundering, and I'll catch you again soon. Cheerio!